It's time to strip away all the filters. The real Wild West had no honor in its duels, no immortal heroes, only sudden violence, incurable disease, and an unceremonious death. If you can handle the unvarnished truth, subscribe, because this is the West as it really was. Number 1. Quick-draw duels almost never happened. That classic scene, high noon, an empty street, two men facing each other, hands hovering over their holsters. Well, that was pretty much made up by Hollywood and the dime novels that sold by the thousands in the 19th century. Records from the time tell a different story. Real violence in the Wild West was dirty. Roadside ambushes, shots fired from behind, and saloon fights where drunks missed more often than they hit. And here's the detail few people know. The fastest men in the West didn't die in duels. Wild Bill Hickok, considered the deadliest gunslinger of his generation, was shot in the back of the head while playing poker, with no chance to react. Jesse James, the most feared outlaw in the country, was shot behind the ear inside his own home while straightening a picture on the wall, killed by a member of his own gang. See the pattern? Nobody wanted to face these men head-on. In the real West, whoever drew first usually fired from somewhere no one could see. Maybe that's why the most famous ones lived so long. They knew honor couldn't stop a bullet. Number 2. Here's something no one told you in school. The Wild West had stricter gun laws than many American cities do today. In Dodge City, Kansas, the first city ordinance, passed in 1878, banned carrying guns within city limits. When a cowboy came in from the trail, before stepping into the saloon, he had to leave his revolver at the sheriff's office or the hotel. He got a claim ticket, just like at a coat check, and only got his gun back when he was leaving. The same rule applied in Tombstone, Arizona, and the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881. It started precisely because Wyatt Earp and his brothers tried to disarm a group that refused to follow the law. There were signs at the entrance warning, "No carrying firearms." Anyone who disobeyed paid a fine or spent the night in jail, so that scene of everyone armed and dueling at high noon is pure Hollywood. In real life, the sheriff was in charge, and the gun stayed locked up until it was time to leave. Number 3. Billy the Kid never had a chance to draw his gun. Forget the high noon duels you've seen in movies. On the night of July 14, 1881, in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, the country's most wanted outlaw walked barefoot into a dark room looking for a piece of meat for dinner. He didn't know that Sheriff Pat Garrett was sitting there in the darkness next to Pete Maxwell's bed. Billy noticed a shadowy figure and asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" "Who's there?" Those were the last words he ever spoke. Garrett recognized his voice, drew his gun, and fired twice. One bullet struck Billy in the chest, just above the heart. He dropped dead at 21 without ever seeing who pulled the trigger. And here's the detail few people mention. The legend claims he killed 21 people, one for every year of his life. Historical records put the number somewhere between 4 and 9. The rest was made up by newspapers that sold more copies with a bigger villain. In the end, the gunslinger who became a symbol of the Wild West died in a dark room, holding nothing but a kitchen knife. The man the law couldn't keep locked up went down without firing a single shot. No warning, no duel, no chance at all to fight back. Number 4. Jesse James was shot in the back while straightening a picture on the wall. Jesse James died from a shot in the back, inside his own home, while straightening a picture on the wall. And the man who pulled the trigger was a member of his own gang. After years of robbing banks and trains, Missouri's most wanted man was living in hiding under the fake name Thomas Howard. On the morning of April 3, 1882, he was at home with brothers Charlie and Robert Ford, members of his gang. It was hot, and Jesse did something unusual. He took off his gun belt and set it on a piece of furniture. Then he climbed onto a chair to straighten a crooked picture. It was the chance Robert Ford had been waiting for. At 20 years old, he had a secret deal with the governor of Missouri. Turn Jesse in exchange for a pardon and a $10,000 reward. He drew his revolver and shot his boss in the back of the head. Jesse died right there, unarmed, at 34 years old. But the plan backfired. Ford received only part of the money, was convicted of murder, and pardoned the same day. He spent the rest of his life branded a traitor, and a popular song immortalized him as the dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard. 10 years later, he was also shot and killed in a saloon in Colorado. Number 5. Justice was often a mob with a rope. Before there was a court, there was a rope and a tree. In the Wild West, when the law couldn't handle things, the townspeople themselves formed what were known as vigilance committees, groups of ordinary citizens who arrested, tried, and executed suspects all in the same night. These hangings even got a grim nickname: necktie parties. And here's the thing: no evidence was needed. All it took was an accusation, a rumor, or a neighbor pointing a finger. In Montana, between 1863 and 1864, vigilantes hanged more than 20 men in just a few weeks. One of them was Henry Plummer, the town sheriff himself, accused of running a gang of highway robbers. He begged for a trial. He didn't get one. He died hanging from the gallows he had ordered built himself. Years later, historians began to wonder, was Plummer actually guilty? Some of the men who were hanged were probably innocent, but in the West, no one apologized to a dead man. And the Montana vigilantes left a signature beside the bodies, the numbers 3 to 7 to 77, a mysterious code that still puzzles scholars to this day. Number 6. Amputations performed with a carpenter's saw. Imagine going to the doctor with a bullet in your leg and hearing that the only option is to cut the limb off while you're awake. In the Wild West, that was exactly how it worked. Decent anesthesia was almost non-existent outside the big cities, so the patient was given a strong dose of whiskey and, sometimes, a lead bullet to bite down on. The surgeon was often a barber, a dentist, or any man with a strong stomach and a sharp saw. The instruments were rarely cleaned between patients. No one there had ever heard of bacteria. An experienced doctor could saw off a leg in under 10 minutes, and there was a reason for the rush. The faster it was done, the less severe the shock. But here's the detail few people know. Surviving the saw didn't guarantee anything. The real death sentence came days later when gangrene set in around the poorly closed stump. Records from the time show that many amputees died from infection, not from the gunshot that put them on the table. In the end, in that world without antiseptics, a man didn't fear the enemy's bullet as much as he feared the doctor who came after it. Number 7. A rattlesnake bite was almost a death sentence. In the Wild West, few things scared a cowboy more than that dry rattle coming from the grass. Before antivenom existed, getting bitten by a rattlesnake meant leaving your life up to chance. The venom attacked the blood and flesh from the inside, and what people did to save the victim almost always made things worse. They cut the wound with a knife, tried to suck out the venom with their mouths, and tied the arm so tightly that the hand turned purple. Others relied on good old whiskey, thinking the alcohol would kill the venom. It didn't. It only made the victim too drunk to understand how serious the danger was. With no hospital nearby, many died within a few hours, overwhelmed by fever and pain. Those who survived often lost a finger, a hand, or an entire leg because the flesh rotted, and the only option was to cut it off with a saw and a knife. On the prairies and in the desert, this animal quietly killed more people than many famous gunslingers. It didn't need a gun or a warning. All it took was one wrong step near a hot rock at high noon. Number 8. Doc Holliday, the gunslinger who died in bed. John Henry Holliday was a dentist before he became a legend, but tuberculosis struck early and changed everything. He left his practice and headed west, chasing the dry air that might slow the disease in his lungs. Along the way, he became a gambler, a drinker, and one of the most dangerous men on the frontier. He was at the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone alongside Wyatt Earp, and survived fights that killed men far stronger than he was. Everyone expected a man like that to go down with a bullet in his chest in some back alley, but that's not how it happened. The disease ate away at him from the inside year after year, draining his weight and his breath. In the end, all that was left was a thin, coughing man looking for relief in the hot springs of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. It was there, in a hotel room in 1887, that he quietly passed away. He was only 36. They say that in his final moments, he looked down at his bare feet. His whole life he had imagined dying with his boots on, standing in the middle of a shootout like any real gunslinger. He looked down and said, "This is funny." Number 9. It seems strange to us today, but back then, burying a child was part of life. On isolated farms in the West, far from any doctor, a child could wake up healthy in the morning and not make it through the night. Diphtheria, measles, and dysentery swept through entire towns, and there were no vaccines, antibiotics, or clean water to stop them from spreading. A fever that today can be handled with a trip to the drugstore could kill within days. It was common for a couple to have 10 or 12 children and watch half of them die before the age of 5. Anyone walking through an old frontier cemetery can still find rows of small headstones, many without names, only a date. Some families lost 3 or 4 children during the same brutal winter. There was so much loss that many parents gave a newborn the same name as a sibling who had died before. That's why having many children wasn't just a desire, it was a cold calculation. With so much land to work and death always lurking, parents knew they needed plenty of extra hands so that at least some of their children would reach adulthood and care for them in old age. Life went on because out there simply was no other choice. Number 10. Barbed wire killed the Wild West without firing a single shot. For centuries, the land out west was wide open. A man could turn his cattle loose, get on his horse, and ride for miles without coming across a single fence. That was how things worked out there. Then, in 1874, an Illinois farmer named Joseph Glidden patented a very simple invention, a metal wire with sharp points. Barbed wire. It changed everything. Within a few years, wealthy ranchers were fencing off thousands of acres and keeping the water and grazing land all to themselves. Small ranchers, who had always depended on the open range, were left with nowhere to go. And when talking no longer worked, the bullets started flying. In 1892, in Johnson County, Wyoming, the cattle barons made a list of names and hired Texas gunmen to hunt down the settlers they called thieves. Men were surrounded inside their own cabins and killed in cold blood. In the end, the freedom of the West did not die because of a law signed in Washington. It died trapped behind a fence, bought with money, and defended at gunpoint. Number 11. Calamity. Jane ended her days in poverty and in the grip of alcohol. The Wild West had its legends, and few shone as brightly as she did. Martha Jane Canary was born around 1852 into a harsh world. She lost her parents while she was still a girl and had to take care of her younger siblings on her own. To survive, she learned to shoot, ride, and stand up to men as an equal. She worked as an Army scout, guided stagecoaches, and for a time rode alongside Wild Bill Hickok. But here's what few people tell you. When the West became entertainment, Martha took the stage in cheap shows and exaggerated her own adventures to win applause and a few bucks. The more the public bought into the legend, the more the real woman disappeared behind it. Away from the spotlight, the story was different. Alcohol took over, the money never lasted, and her final years were filled with illness and poverty. She died in 1903, alone and penniless, near Deadwood. Martha was buried next to Hickok. The legend lived on in books and on stage, but the real woman had been left behind by the world long before that. Number 12. The End of the Outlaws had no movie soundtrack. Think of the Wild West and you picture shootouts at sunset. But the ones who actually survived met a much less exciting fate. Frank James, brother of the legendary Jesse, spent years running from the law. When he turned himself in and was acquitted by a jury, what did he become? A tour guide. He took curious visitors to the old family farm and charged a few cents per person for the tour. He also sold shoes in a store and worked as a theater usher, tearing tickets at the door. And he wasn't alone. Cole Younger, his old partner in crime, got out of prison and went door to door selling headstones and insurance. Emmett Dalton, a survivor of a bank robbery that went terribly wrong, moved to California, became a real estate agent, and even appeared in Hollywood movies telling his own stories. In the end, the outlaw era did not end in one big shootout at sunset. It ended with these men punching the clock, counting change, and growing old in ordinary jobs, just like any of us. Number 13. In 1890, the United States government made an announcement that went almost unnoticed, but changed everything. In just a few lines, the Census Bureau declared that the frontier was over. There was no longer an open stretch of land waiting to be settled. Stop and think about what that means. For nearly 100 years, Americans had grown up hearing that there was always a piece of land farther ahead, beyond the horizon, waiting for them. Then, all of a sudden, someone picked up a pen and wrote that this line no longer existed. The Wild West, that place of cowboys, gunslingers, and towns that sprang up out of nowhere in just a few months, was closed, fenced in with barbed wire, mapped down to the smallest detail, connected from one end to the other by railroad tracks. What came next was a different story. The movies, the cheap 10-cent books, the sharpshooting shows, all of it sold a version of the West that in reality was already dead. People paid good money to see a dream that no longer existed outside the screen. And the myth stayed alive precisely because the real place had ceased to exist.